Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Sorry, I caught myself a little off guard there. This is your weekly deep dive intel brief, where we give you the best of the things you may have learned this week to make sure that in case you missed any of the shows, you don't miss anything that's really important to your life. And this week was like, man, it seems like all of them these days. A lot of things happen, and a lot of things you need to be aware of. And I want to start off with Larry Johnson, Larry the Shirt Johnson, one of our faves on here because he's former CIA intel guy. Has always got some good insights into things. One of the things, what he was talking about this week was the details of this new Oreshnik missile that Russia had fired. And just real briefly, for those who may not know, Russia unveiled a new category of weapon that it was used in combat for the first time against the Ukraine side in retaliation for the U.S. using long-range weapons in Ukraine against Russia. Putin went on television and talked about how this was a significant new capability that there was no defense against, et cetera. Many in the West were like saying, "Yeah, I'm not sure it really is." But we brought on Larry to say, "What do you think about this missile?" And he had something interesting to say here. He used a phrase which I have never used on anything at all, any weapon system at all that's been introduced into this war, and that was the term game changer, because there's really, usually things are an improvement, or they'll give you a temporary advantage, but then the enemy usually figures out countermeasures and very often will bring in its own version. So it's not really a game changer, but Larry thought this one might actually be.
This is a game changer because we've never had a weapon system that could be delivered with such power and such accuracy that it could literally destroy this monster of a plant. That, when you think about a mile worth of buildings, underground buildings. And I asked this friend of mine, I said, "What's the story?" He goes, "It's dust. It's dust." And there are other eyewitness accounts reporting the same thing. Now, that's one of the reasons that the Ukrainian intelligence service, SBU, has shut down, classified any reports coming out of there. Well, if there was no damage, if there was minimal damage, man, come out, take the TV crews out. Hey, look at these Russians are lying. The Russians aren't lying. And so Vladimir Putin has put a marker on the table. He's calling his next shot. And the Russians now, they don't have to go nuclear. I don't know what you call this. They're calling it the hazelnut or Oreshnik.
Yeah.
And maybe Oreshnik is going to come to symbolize something new within military jargon. You can't imagine that there's something else out there. And it's like, prior to last Thursday, could anybody imagine that Russia could launch a weapon that would have the effect of a nuclear bomb without all the nasty side effects? And I bet you 99.9% of the people in Washington D.C. say, that's crazy. That never happened. It happened. It happened last Thursday. Wake up.
And here's the potential problem with calling it a game changer. For it to actually be a game changer, both sides have to recognize the reality. And what I seriously worry about right now is that the West may not realize it. We may think it's just another missile, just another long-range missile. But as has been demonstrated at least once, and let me underscore that it's only been used one time, and so we don't know for sure how reliable it is, how many they may have. Will it be effective the next time it's used? Will it be effective every time it's used? That part we don't know. But you have to assume that what you saw demonstrated in combat very successfully, and something that none of our air defense systems can defend against, we have to take it very seriously. Because if we have any significant sites anywhere, the U.S. Aegis Ashore missile defense base in Poland, the U.S. base in Germany, the Ramstein Air Base, et cetera. Anything else, we have other things in Romania. We got them all over the place. So does many other NATO countries. If they can literally hit anything they want at any time and there's nothing we can do to stop it, that is a game changer. Because we have plenty of missiles on our side, and obviously so does the Russians, many conventional missiles, Kinzhals, and et cetera. But if those things can sometimes be knocked down. Some of ours can sometimes be knocked down also. Some of them will get through. We certainly have a high quality of missiles ourselves, even if we're short on the number of them. But the question's got to be, what do we do about this? And of course, that's if it stays conventional. Now, if it goes into a nuclear situation, then obviously we're not talking about just a kinetic strike, because those missiles that we saw from the Oreshnik strike in Dnipro were basically inert. It was just a great hunk of metal that had catastrophic effects when it hit the target, going at Mach 10 at reaching temperatures of 4,000 degrees by the expert S-analysis. And that by itself is a destructive force. So it doesn't even need explosive per se. But if it has a nuclear warhead, you don't have to finish that sentence. You understand where it's going to go. And here's probably the part of the problem here is that we don't understand what it means. And now then people are thinking, okay, well, Biden obviously didn't know any of this stuff. I mean, the fact that he escalated this beyond where it was by allowing long-range missiles, which prompted the use of the Oreshnik in the first place, maybe he's just not that smart. Maybe, though, that President Trump is going to come in and play a little 5D chess, as Patrick Henningsen suggested.
This clearly should be framed as a provocation by a lame duck outgoing Biden administration. If that's the case, it would provide a great platform for which an incoming Trump administration could say, what, Biden's crazy, wants to blow up the world. This old man is a zombie president who is basically doing the worst possible thing. In fact, I'm quite shocked that Trump hasn't come out publicly and made these proclamations already. And to me, so he could use this as leverage. What Biden's doing is leverage. It might very well be used as leverage to force negotiation from other NATO partners. But is that the level of 5D chess that the incoming Trump administration is playing? It doesn't seem like it. We have the treaty dilemma. We have the diplomacy dilemma. There's no diplomacy going on. We have the censorship dilemma. The West has censored out all Russian media and statements by Russian officials. You've thrown up some, headlines and statements by Vladimir Putin here, and that's highly instructive. But Daniel, I don't see any of these clips being played on any of the main U.S. media outlets.
And I just want to take a few things that he mentioned there in order. Now, first of all, there has been a lot of people who said one of the reasons why Trump has not come out forcefully and said that he was upset about Joe Biden potentially escalating this is because maybe it was a deal they had together. Because you may recall that after the election, Trump went to the White House and they had that famous picture in the Oval Office in front of the fireplace there, where the two of them were being very genial and very, good and nice to each other. What any kind of awkward situation. And then it was shortly thereafter that Biden made the announcement that he was allowing long-range weapons to be used in Ukraine against Russia. The thought being that maybe this is something they came up together and they said, hey, how's about you do this? And then so you kind of escalate and then I'll come in to de-escalate, et cetera. And this will give me leverage to bring the war to an end, which I'm going to do. That's one theory that's floating around there. I don't have any insider information. Nobody, I've talked to a few people inside the Trump administration. They have no idea. They said he keeps some of that stuff close to the vest and they don't know what he said, or else they're not telling me. I don't know which. But that if that is the case, if that's the intent, there's some real problems with that, because Vladimir Putin militarily, and that means tactically, operationally, and strategically, has all the cards for negotiations. He's got the leverage, not the incoming Trump administration. This is what people need to understand. Trump ran out a platform that he was going to bring the war to an end, and he can. He does have the capacity to do that. He has the authority. He has the resources to do it. But how he does it is the big issue here. If people think that because Donald Trump is the so-called great deal maker, that he's going to come in and get some kind of a deal that's beneficial and preferable to the Kiev regime, yikes. We got to really rethink what our mind is trying to tell us, because that's not going to happen. I don't tell you that's unlikely. I'll tell you it flat will not happen. There is no rational view that would ever say that the side that's militarily winning the war is going to suddenly negotiate from a position of strength a deal that actually benefits the weaker side. That's like saying the Soviet Union in say January, February 1945, when they're just 3 months away from getting into Berlin, is going to suddenly say, but you know what? Yeah, let's have a negotiated settlement, and we'll let Hitler keep his throne there in Berlin, etc. Obviously, it's not going to happen. And no matter what the Hitler may have wanted, there's no way from a position of strength military would do that. It's been that way throughout human history, thousands of years. Nobody from a position of strength negotiates a position good for the weaker side. It's not going to happen here, no matter how bad Trump wants it, no matter how clever he tries to be, bringing in people, etc. That's just not in the cards. So if Trump comes into office and recognizes, okay, I've been handed a weaker hand here, and I'm going to make the best that I can of it, then he does have the capacity to bring the war to an end. And there are ways to do that. But that's going to require some humility, and it's going to require some recognition of the ground truth. And of course, it's going to require a no shortage amount of diplomacy. And you heard Patrick there talk a little bit about the fact that no diplomacy was going on. And we had Scott Horton on this week, who was also talking about diplomacy and its absent, and his really grave concern about the potential consequences if that continues into the next administration.
Let's just zoom out and pretend for just a second here. In the broad strokes of the history of humanity, this is really our plan, that we're going to hold thermonuclear bombs to each other's head in a giant Mexican standoff from now on, for the next 100 years and the next 100 years and the next 100 years. America, the planet divided by national governments holding thermonuclear weapons. That cannot end well. And you see what happens here. We're like, look, man, we got a red line. We'll use nukes. Once Lavrov says that, now what's he supposed to do? Back down? I mean, he can. But you get all this weird public choice theory kicks in, where now it's not what's good for humanity, and it's not what's good for the national interest. It's what's good for the politicians in charge that day. What if, let's say, worst case scenario, Putin nukes Atlanta and says, "Now, believe me, I'm really mad." So what do? Do we say, "Oh man, Joe Biden really got us into trouble, and we better, now that they've escalated, we better de-escalate. This really is all Barack Obama's fault," like it says in Scott Horton's book. We should quit while we've only lost Atlanta. No, you and I know, and anyone who knows anything about American nuclear doctrine knows that, no, we go to general nuclear war, and we kill every city in Russia, and they kill every city in the United States. They kill our military bases, and they kill our cities. That's the plan. Use them or lose them. And in virtually every war game, going back to the 1980s, it always escalates to general nuclear war.
It's hard to overemphasize the point that Scott made there and how serious it is. There is far too many people who are just dismissing the possibility of things going to nuclear war. We've shown a number of them on our shows in recent days and weeks. The United States, they just say, that's never going to happen. Don't even worry about it. Worry about it. Because if you say it's not going to happen and you were right 99 times in a row, terrific track record, okay, nothing bad happens. And then on the 100th time you're wrong, we're all dead, or a great many people, millions of people would be dead, even if somehow you prevented it from going to a full-on general nuclear war, as Scott talked about there. If one is used, it's catastrophic for mankind. And of course, if it goes further than that, it's ridiculous. Therefore, any rational thinking person would recognize that it is the height of self-defeating futility to even play around the edges of it. Vladimir Putin has already officially lowered the threshold for their use of nuclear weapons, because in his view, it's 1 against 50. He's already facing that right now. And of course, many of those 50 on the Ukrainian side have nuclear weapons. So he figures that if anything comes to it, we'll use ours. That's kind of where he is on that. And he has very clearly stated it. Many of his senior leaders have stated it. They said they don't want to do that. They think there would be no winner, but they're prepared to do it if things escalate. And we are playing with just absurd risk to our future by saying he won't do it, so let's go on. And here's the thing. You don't even have anything to gain from that. Taking that kind of risk is so absurd because there's no upside. It's not like, yeah, if we, got right up to the edge of whatever their red line, actually the nuclear red line for Russia actually is, then what? You don't have the military on our side to do anything different tactically on the battlefield. You can't improve your situation. This comes down to arrogance and pride. We don't want to be seen as backing down. Well, I'm telling you, I don't give a damn what you want. Back the hell down. Don't go up to that level. Don't find out where the real red line is, because as long as there is no nuclear escalation, we remain in the preeminent power position in Europe. NATO is still fully engaged, has not been attacked, has not been diminished anywhere. And the line between the East and the West is still on the map. And everybody west of that is still open, free, and prosperous, and continue to be so. All we have to do is not be stupid to escalate beyond. And I think that was one of the big points Scott was trying to make there. One of the other very much related pieces of news this week came primarily just yesterday, is when it really started hitting the news here in the United States. And that is Zelensky apparently says, hey, I'm willing to discuss land for peace. Finally, we've been talking about that for a long time, that's going to happen, whether anybody wants it or not. And Zelensky was delusional and kept on talking about the 1991 borders were going to win and all that stuff that there was no basis in fact for. And then he went on the Telegraph and said, hey, no, seriously, I'm willing to contemplate that. Now, when you look at the video, and by the way, you can watch it on the show we just finished a little while ago, where we played a lot of that. Certainly go back to our show and you can watch from earlier today where we discussed a lot of the details of that. But the bottom line is, even that is unrealistic, because he's kind of says, I'm willing to give peace, or land, but not really. I really want it all back. And I want Putin to give me everything that I want. And even though he's in charge, and even though no one's actually said we can go into NATO, we want it anyway. Really the same thing that he said when he was in Washington in July at the NATO summit. NATO didn't offer it then. They're not going to offer it now. Apparently there's news this morning that the Ukraine side is going to send a delegation to Brussels next week and ask for a direct invitation into NATO. They're not going to get it. I mean, we're not that stupid. That's the reason. There's a reason why we haven't done it up to this point, but that's what we've done. Well, in addition to what Zelensky has said, there's also some troubling that, first of all, the Russians said that according to their sources, up to potentially 100,000 of Western troops, NATO troops, are being contemplated by some in the West to maybe act as a buffer zone or a peacekeeping force between the two sides when something can get negotiated out. Now, if that seems kind of ridiculous on the surface of it, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron from France and UK are talking about continuing to escalate things and to give more and more resources to the Ukraine side, possibly even to include European troops. They're actually talking about, well, maybe if we put some French and British troops in the western part of Ukraine, that will kind of act as a buffer to give them some additional flexibility. No, folks, that ain't going to happen. That's not the way it's going to work. Russia has been unequivocal of saying that if you bring Western troops into Ukraine anywhere, you're bringing them into the war zone, and they are going to be legitimate targets, and we will take them out. And you see that Russia is striking targets all over Ukraine, and the air defense systems there can minimize some of it only, but they can't stop it. And they haven't been able to do so far, to devastating consequences. And now then, as we get closer to the December, we're just right on the cusp of it. The energy system and the heating system for the country of Ukraine has been terribly diminished. And already millions of Ukrainians have no heat. And the temperature doesn't even get bad really until December and January. That's when it starts to get really, really bad. So things are already really bad for the population. Something's going to have to happen. But to think that putting a few Western troops will somehow stop that, and that those, the same air defenses that they have right now will magically work if the Western forces come in, is crazy. Or the idea that he wouldn't actually do that. If Putin saw, French troops on the ground in Ukraine or British troops, then he would think twice. That's more delusional thinking, folks. It's not going to happen. And the other thing that people are trying to pin their hopes on is, well, but maybe when Trump comes in That's what Macron and Biden and Keir Starmer are doing. But when Trump comes in, he is willing to negotiate. He is willing to do diplomacy. And in fact, the guy that Trump personally just hired or just designated as his European envoy to Ukraine to try and get this resolved was General Kellogg. And we also, you can see a lot of this on our previous show. Going to get all the details there. I won't bore you, especially for those people who've already watched that. I don't want to double dip on that, but I do want to point out something that we didn't point out on the previous show, is that Kellogg has had really bad advice for a long, long time. In March of 2022, he just had a very unrealistic view on what the war was like and what Ukraine could do. I actually came out in the same month on Fox News, and I said there is no military solution here. Ukraine it should do everything it can to reach a negotiated settlement right now. Don't wait for anything else. At the same time, this guy is saying, yes, keep going, keep fighting, because Russia's going to lose. Well, by October of 2022, General Kellogg again came on. Very instructive here, because let me lay the groundwork for you. This is about the time when the Russian side had suffered its two biggest losses. Ukraine drove them out of Kherson City in the south and drove them off this huge swath of land in the north. In the Kharkiv area, it's like 6,000 square kilometers, a huge area, because of some horrific operational art that the Russians had done, terrible mistakes that they made, and the Ukraine side was able to exploit and take charge of it. Now, a month from this report that I'm about to show, or this interview I'm about to show you, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said, "Hey, folks, this is a really good time to seek a negotiated settlement. You actually have a shot at getting something that's relatively good for Ukraine, because the Russian side is really hurting because of all these losses that they've already had." That's what he said a month after this. But here is the advice given by General Kellogg in October.
He needs to pick up the phone. He needs to call Vladimir Putin and say quite clearly to him, look, we are going all in. We are going to provide Ukraine with every bit of armament they need to defeat the Russian army in the field and force them out of the field. And that means Crimea as well. And then you turn it over to Putin and said, okay, it's over to you now. What are you going to do? I understand the risk behind that, but we haven't done that. As was said earlier, we haven't given him the armament he needs. We haven't given him the air defense that he needs. Give it to him, press the attack going forward. Then you basically tell Putin, it's up to you. Do you want to escalate, or do you want to negotiate? And if you escalate, we're prepared for that. If you want to negotiate, we're prepared for that as well.
Okay. Anyone who knows what's going on, especially a former general, should have known at the time that there wasn't the military capacity to make good on what he said there. That you can't build an army in conflict as you're fighting and have it be able to perform offensive operations when it has never done so in its national history. All it had ever done was man trench lines for 8 years prior to all this. They had a relatively small army. Russia has big, all this. All the fundamentals were clearly on the table in March and February of 2022. Everyone should have known that if this went long enough and if it turned into an attritional battle, Ukraine could never win. They could never do it. And yet you heard him right there say, yes, give them everything they need to drive Russia off the field. Now, also true about this time, the CIA Director Burns has recently revealed that around this time, when this video was made, that Putin was considering the use of tactical nuclear weapons because of those losses. That's how serious it was for him to have even suffered those relatively minor setbacks. And you have this guy apparently oblivious to that, acted saying, yeah, push harder, push more. I mean, just think how ridiculous that is. Somebody is desperate and they're considering using nuclear weapons, and you're saying, pile it on, put more on there. I mean, that is self-destructive. And of course, as we know, we did give them everything that they had. They asked for nearly everything they wanted, certainly at that time, to conduct the offensive, which happened about 6 months later, 6 or 8 months later, actually in June of 2023. And as you know, that completely broke its teeth on the first line of Russia's defense, and they never penetrated. And they've been on the defensive ever since. They've been on the retreat ever since, is a better way to put it. Yet the advice that he gave and continued to give throughout was that was somehow going to work. And if that's the kind of advice that Trump is going to be getting from his special envoy, yikes. I mean, he needs somebody who's grounded in reality. And for those who may say, well, he's saying that one thing in private, but behind the scenes, it may be different. There could be some truth to that. But why would you want to say something in public that is unrealistic and can't be accomplished? I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because who benefits from that? How does that benefit anybody? Just to put a good face on something that you know can't work, when people are going to be hearing that, and they're going to, especially members of Congress and the publics, they're going to be thinking, yeah, this general said it, so maybe they do have a shot. Maybe we should, give another $61 billion, et cetera. Same month, by the way, we were looking for yet more supplementals, and the billions of dollars just kept piling up, and the money kept going on. We know where that leads and who benefits from that. And I don't know. I'm not going to accuse the general of saying that he, wanted the war to go on for the economic purposes. I'm not going to say that. That would be a different category. I rather think it's something that's concerning in a different way, is that he just didn't know, that he actually believed what he was saying. And again, the incoming administration says, I want to seek a negotiated settlement. He needs somebody who can tell him ground truth, reality, metal on metal kind of truth. I don't care if you want to hear it. This is what's real. Just imagine if you're going to go in and have a negotiation with somebody, and you need to understand what the leverage on the other side of the table, what they have, what they can and what they can't do. And so when then you look at your own cards in your own hands and you see where your leverage is, and you got to think, all right, how can I play my strength against his weaknesses, and how can I deflect his strengths against my weaknesses? If you don't have an accurate picture of the two sides, then you're going to be walking into a trap. You're going to be trying to accomplish something that can't be accomplished, or trying to something you think is a strength on yours and is a weakness over there could be absolutely reversed, because you just don't know. That's the problem, because Trump, I mean, he's a politician. He's campaigning all this time. He's talking about every topic in the world that has to do with the White House. He's not just focusing on this one. That's why he has experts in different areas. And if the experts you have in this area is not tied to reality and is not willing to tell the president, here's where you're strong and here's where you're weak, don't go here, don't offer this, then he could be setting everybody up for disaster, because then Trump may push a bad position thinking that he's got leverage when he doesn't. What he should do, what he does have the ability to do, is make good on his campaign promise to bring this to an end. He can say, yes, I get it. There's going to have to be some land given away. And look, Trump isn't even authorized to make that choice. That's something that only the leaders of Ukraine can do. But what Trump can do is saying privately, Zelensky, listen, this is not in the cards. You're going to have to give up some land if you want the war to end. And if you don't give up some land willingly in negotiations, Putin has the capacity to take it. And we are not going to get into a war with Russia to prevent that. He needs to be point blank and tell Zelensky, this is how this is going to go. If you don't take this option here and seek a negotiated settlement, we're not going to allocate any more money. We're not going to continue to give pour more and more money down the holes to allow you to lose slower. We're going to stop providing this money and these weapons. We just don't have it. And I don't have it, and I'm not going to continue to deteriorate my own stocks of long-range weapons and interceptor missiles, especially, which are desperately needed for our own national security, to facilitate a slower loss. We're just not going to do it. And then it's up to him what he does. Now, that's a hard position. That's a difficult thing to do, because eventually you'd have to say that publicly, especially if Zelensky was willing to call Trump's bluff and say, I don't think that you're willing to do that, because, he could say, oh, we have a chance, but you're going to pull the rug out from under us by stopping. It'll be your fault if we lose. Guarantee you that'll happen for sure. So it would take a firm, tough backbone, and somebody who's really understands the complex situation here, and then has the brass ball, so to speak, to go in front of the cameras and say, yes, that is right. There is no path to victory here. This is the only thing that makes any sense. I have an obligation to the American people, and we will not facilitate and pay for a slow loss at the expense of our national security. This is what has to happen. Now, if Trump does that, then the detractors are going to hate him anyway. But the whole bunch of other people will go, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And I appreciate you looking out for our needs and our interest, and for the people of Ukraine, because that's the only way this is going to end for them at all. It's not going to end good. It never has. That's really off the table. But that's what has to be done. That's a hard thing to do. And I don't diminish that. I don't minimize how hard that would be, but that's also what's necessary to save the lives of Ukraine and to give them any hope for a future in beyond the end of this war. We'll see what President Trump does. And we'll be right on top of it for you to tell you all about it and to give you an assessment once he takes office, especially. But in the meantime, I hope you guys have a good weekend. Appreciate you joining us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.